How do we know we're actually building an employee experience we should be proud of? It just reframes how you look at the people team. So instead of being almost like a knee-jerk reaction to things that happen to you, you're the one leading the change, which means that to be proactive, you need to understand what is it that we're trying to drive. We need to be part of that conversation. And if the direction of business is this, we need to know, how do our people contribute? How does my team, how do my initiatives allow us to achieve that? Not as an afterthought, but as part of the strategy. This is what I'm responsible for. What are the 2 or 3 things that I need to focus on for the next 2 years and start there? There were studies done that showed that manager effectiveness was the best predictor of organizational success. So if a manager is effective in the running of their own team, that puts the company in a much better place to succeed.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by HowNow, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use HowNow to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, So Energy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.
Welcome back to L&D Disrupt. This episode, we have Daniel Gualdino, who is a people and culture leader with over 15 years of experience leading high-performance cultures and culture-first organisations across retail, media, tech and food industry. So wanted to say welcome to you, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. So lovely to have you. I am so excited about this podcast because we are going to be diving into PX design as people. But before we get into that, for anyone that doesn't know you, can you give me a brief introduction to yourself, how you got into HR, because our journeys are always squiggly, how you got into HR, and a bit about what you've been doing at Oatly?
Oh, certainly. So I got into HR, I think, like most people, which was randomly. I don't think any kid at home is hoping to be an HR person when they're little. I don't think that ever happens. I studied psychology, so I did a bachelor's and a master's in psychology and organizational psychology. And my first job after I finished my master's was in L&D. So that was my introduction. I did L&D for a few years, and from there I went to sort of like generalist roles. And within the space of generalist roles, I did a bit of everything, talent and people partnering, then sort of like progressed to leading people teams and talent teams as well. And that sort of just happened organically. I've always had a passion for data. I think also because of my background in psychology, there's a lot of data analytics, there's a lot of research. So I've always tried to embed a little bit of data analytics into how we measure our success in people teams, how we measure performance. And I've also had roles where I'm just more specifically focused on data and research, where I had to also partner with some of the biggest organizations on the globe, which was really, really exciting. And now more recently, I am at Oatly, as you mentioned. I'm leading the people and culture function here in the UK and Ireland. And yeah, I think everything just happened organically. And I think, and this is the advice I tend to give to people whenever I'm asked for like advice on careers, like just kind of like follow your passion, which sounds a bit fluffy, but it's true. I think our curiosity can unlock a lot of doors. And for me, that's how it happened when I maybe earlier on in my career was chasing maybe the wrong things. Maybe I found a lot of locked doors. But when I started focusing on things that were that really spoke to me, things that I was curious or passionate about, irrespective of what that meant in terms of progression or salary or whatever it is, things just sort of happen, and that's where I am today.
Yeah, an amazing journey as well. So let's talk about product-led HR.
Here we go.
I'll try not to spend the whole time talking about this, because this is something that I've recently learnt about and am as passionate about it as you. So for HR people or L&D folks that do not know what product-led HR is, can you give me a bit of an overview, if you are introing what that process looks like?
Yes. So I think if you ask different people, you get different answers. Because it's also such a new thing, as you said, or at least maybe not as new, but not extremely popular. I think for me, it's, in a nutshell, is applying that sort of like product and product marketing ways of working to a people team. And what that means is historically people teams have been reactive in nature. They've been sort of maybe more policy or admin driven or focused rather than focusing on value and impact over the years. And that was just a reflection of where the businesses were throughout the times. And I think when tech companies, and because I think a lot of this was driven by the tech industry and tech startups, when tech companies became more prevalent and more present in our day-to-day lives, they've changed the way we worked and put a focus on other things rather than just policy, making sure we get payroll done, make sure contracts are signed, all of those things. And it asked the question of how do we know we're adding value? How do we know we're actually building an employee experience we should be proud of? And it just reframes how you look at the people team. So instead of being almost like a knee-jerk reaction to things that happen to you, you're the one leading the change, which means that to be proactive, you need to understand what is it that we're trying to drive. So the same way that a product team, if I'm building an app, if I'm building a car, whatever I'm building, I'm always thinking, what does my end user need? What are the needs that I'm trying to solve or answer to by building this piece of technology or whatever it is? We should be thinking the same thing when we're in the people team, which is if I'm designing a benefits package, if I'm designing a new hiring process, what is it that my candidate at the end of the line needs me to provide? What is the optimum sort of like solution that I'm driving towards, and build with that in mind? So always reverse engineer from what great looks like, what is the destination, what we're trying to achieve, and build something that speaks to that. So in this space, I have a mantra that I always apply, which is people over processes, processes over tools. And you hear people over processes a lot, especially coming from an agile perspective, which makes sense. You should focus on a process that makes sense for the people, not the other way around. So people should be the main thing that we're trying to, at the end of the day, people being our end user, something that makes sense to our end user. But I take it one step further, and I think we should also be thinking of people over processes, but also processes over tools. And as an example of that, for example, we don't buy a new applicant tracking system and then design a process and then think of the candidate afterwards. We do it the other way around. So the tool needs to be flexible enough to accommodate our process, not the other way around. So that's something that I've been introduced to, I would say, a few years ago. I think it was probably maybe 2018 when I first got introduced to the concept of agile working and product-led people teams. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all, but at the end of the day, I think you're doing a good job if you have clear metrics of what you're trying to achieve. And you're having this philosophy of what does our end user need. If we're launching an L&D initiative, a well-being initiative, what are the success metrics that we're going to be measuring so that we know that our end user is getting what they need from us?
I love that. There's a few questions I want to ask about that, but I am going to focus on the L&D element because I know a lot of our listeners are L&D. So like you said, focusing on the right metrics. Now, we know some of those metrics may be completion rates, engagement scores, so the kind of metrics traditionally that you would have on a system. What are the metrics that you have seen are more successful that align to business outcomes?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think it also depends on where your business is in terms of what stage of growth your business is and what you're going after from a strategy point of view. From a people perspective, you historically see a focus on, for example, ENPS as a score, which I don't necessarily believe in. I don't think it tells us anything, at least tells us anything significant or meaningful. I'm not saying it's a metric that you should completely disregard, but I don't think it should be the one that people focus on. And at the moment, a lot of companies still do that because it's easy. It gives you a score, and that's a score that you can take to your senior stakeholders and say, hey, our score is X. I think the formula by which you get the score is completely flawed because I think it disregards so much. So that's one that people tend to use. Participation rate, completion rates, I get that's an important sort of like... it's an important metric, but I wouldn't say it again. It can say a lot. It can also not tell the whole story. engagement scores are an important measure, but also when we talk about engagement score, the question becomes, what is engagement? And if you speak to multiple providers, multiple specialists in the field, you'll see that their definition, their makeup of engagement differs. And I think that in a way hurts the credibility of that factor or that outcome, because I may have a definition of engagement that I'm very happy with, and you may have one that you're very happy with, but they're not the same. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a selling point for ENPS, because it's always the same.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think you need to understand what your business is, what stage of growth, what you need from your business. There are times, for example, if you're going through rapid growth, maybe like time to hire, candidate experience, onboarding experience, those things could be really, really important. And I'm talking here about more like development, not just in terms of L&D, but like growth and things like that. You want to understand your retention rate, your performance rates. Those are tend to be the metrics that you tend to have during those times. I don't think our role can be reduced to one single metric.
Yeah.
I think we have a holistic view of things, because you may have, for example, a great onboarding rate, but you may also have a performance process that's completely flawed and it's giving you the wrong metrics and the wrong data at the end of the day. So I don't think we can look at it just from one angle only.
Yeah.
So there's probably if you look, what I tend to do is to map out your employee experience, including your candidate experience. So from trying to understand the whole journey of when someone first applies for a role in your company, what their journey is like, then how they become an employee, what their journey is like, what your manager journey is like, and literally map it out almost like a tube map.
Yeah.
And at that point, when you're mapping out this experience, there are we call it critical points. For example, someone gets promoted, someone is going through maybe a life change, because it also happens. And how does that impact? Is there a first-time manager? Because the experience for a first-time manager is different from a solid, experienced, seasoned manager. So there's a lot of work mapping this out, but it does help you understand that wherever you are along that journey, there are key metrics that we should pay attention to. So that's why I feel like it's a little bit sometimes limiting if we just want to bring it down to one. Yeah. But I also understand the ease and the simplicity of just having one. I think then our job and our challenge in the people space is conveying this to the business in a way that not just adds to the strategy, but is part of the actual strategy.
Yeah.
And that's a skill in itself.
Yeah, some of the stuff you've just said are just golden nuggets, because like you said, mapping the whole employee experience, having the time, you have to have the time to do 100%. That, to see where the magic happens and actually where the gaps are in that experience, and where you do need the attention to kind of obsess over the problem that are letting down those kind of bigger metrics. Is there any tools, or what do you use to map it? Do you use a whiteboard, or do you use Whimsical? What are the kind of things that you would say, look, if you've never mapped your employee process before, this is some of the things you can use to do it?
I've literally a whiteboard and some markers is all you need. Yeah. And a good knowledge of the business, I would say. If I was just joining a business today and I'm in my first month, I wouldn't be able to do that, because there's a level of knowledge that you need to have that's quite deep. But a whiteboard is all you need. I've also done it on Miro, which I think is also a good tool to let you create those flow charts and understand. And again, it creates a space where you can just document that and it lives there, whereas a whiteboard, eventually you have to erase it. Notion, things like that can be a good place to store those flow charts or that journey. I like to have it on Miro just from the perspective that you can then change it, because things do change, and there'll be things that you might maybe look back and say, actually, this is not an important persona or journey for us to focus on, or maybe we forgot something here. And there's a natural evolution to these things, because culture is an organic thing that keeps on growing. The business is the same thing, and your employee experience also changes throughout the years. So being able to have something that you can almost have as your source of truth, but that you can add to, is important. So I would say something as basic as Miro, or what's it called, Whiteboard, which is I think it's a Microsoft version. Something as simple as that could just do the trick. If you want to do it on PowerPoint, I'm sure you can still do it on PowerPoint or in Excel. But I would say that just doing it, as you say, it's an intensive, thorough exercise. But I remember a few years ago, I was it's going to sound like a humble brag, but that's not what I mean. I was doing this talk in a conference in Barcelona, and at the time, this was probably like 2-3 years ago. I think that's when really AI came into the dialogue, the discussion, and everyone was like excited about AI. I think ChatGPT was just becoming a thing, at least in the public space. And there were a lot of talks about AI. And I remember talking and there was like, this is a big conference, lots of people from all over the place. And the talk of the town was AI.
Yeah.
But then when you ask them, like, but could you tell me a little bit more about your employee experience? Could you tell me, like, what your onboarding is for your new starters? What's your, for example, time to impact?
Yeah.
From the moment someone's joins the company to when you tangibly can measure impact in the role. What does that look like?
Yeah.
They couldn't do it. And I feel like it's almost like we want to run, but we haven't even started to walk yet. So AI, I think, is great. There's a lot of great tools, but let's do the basics and the fundamentals first. And let's do them well. And then we can talk about the tools. Like I said, people over processes, process over tools.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the tools later on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you need to know what problem you're obsessing over before you start to prompt an AI, because AI has an opinion of where you should focus, but you also need to, because you have the context.
Exactly.
Yeah, they don't have the context of your organisation. So you need to have the context of your organisation to be able to use AI as a tool, for that, but not to drive the process.
And question it, because a lot of what AI does is biased, and AI ultimately is trying to please you. It's the biggest yes person in the room.
Yeah.
They very rarely will contradict you, and they will tell you what you want to hear. So if they're telling me about something that I'm an expert in, I'll be able to say, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
But if it's something that I'm not clued in on, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's absolutely right. And it might not be. So it's, as you say, it's a tool. We should be using it mindfully. And I always say, like, just because AI can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do something.
Yeah.
There's like other avenues we can explore.
Yeah.
But rightfully so. Like, we can use it to help us, but not dictate how we, 100% how we do things.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because I remember I was using AI this week for a task, as we all do, and it came back with something, and I said to it, that doesn't sound quite right. And it said, oh, yes, apologies, it's not right. But if I hadn't known what I was talking about, you could trust. You would trust that what it was saying was correct. But it's a people pleaser unless you prompt it to be critical. And I know you can use prompt to be critical. Some people don't know how to use AI. We're all trying, like you said, we're all crawling along trying to figure out how to use these new tools that we've been given for automation or prompting. And so I completely agree with you. So going back to people as a product, you're obsessing over the problem. Workplace is the product.
Yeah.
You want to create the best employee experience. Yeah. Now, we know that employee experience doesn't always just touch HR. It's not sometimes that experience isn't HR. It might be that your salespeople are not having a great experience because of the tooling or the enablement or things that aren't in your control. So my question is to you, how do you influence? So when you're doing let's go back. How do you do your discovery? How do you know what the problems are in the business to make that experience the best it possibly can be?
I ask AI, and I'm joking. There's two ways to go about it. Obviously, there's probably more ways to go about it, but there's two ways I tend to go about it, which is collecting data, quantitative data, and qualitative data.
Yeah.
And I think those two tend to be the best way to inform your decision, but also to tell the story when you're talking, like as part of your senior leadership team or you're talking to your stakeholders, to convey the story or the urgency of the problem.
Yeah.
Because if you just go into those rooms and say, I think we have an issue with sales, or I think there's an issue with whatever it is, no one's going to listen to you because there's no evidence. So we need to collect the evidence. And usually the evidence comes in the form of data. So you can be, for example, if you have a big attrition issue, it's like your attrition rate. And not just you can, and the beauty of merging quantitative and qualitative is because your attrition rate might say, 20% of your people are leaving within their first year, but it doesn't tell you why. Yeah. And the qualitative can then add that layer of they're leaving because they don't have growth opportunities or because they feel like they were missold the role and they said they were going to be super strategic and they come to the role and everything is admin and operational. Yeah. So having that data at your fingertips is crucial.
Yeah.
And that's not just with attrition, with anything. So obviously companies these days, and we do the same, and I've done the same thing across many organizations, you do your engagement surveys. It's important when you're creating your engagement surveys, like just thinking about what is it that we want to capture. Because there's usually templates of questions you want to ask, which is fair enough. But there, you might be going through something unique. You might have some challenges that you've been working on, or something that initiatives that you've launched that you want to capture the impact of. So I think it's good to have that baseline, but also think about your context. And at the end of the day, it's an opportunity for us to collect really rich and valuable data. And it'd be a shame to let that go because we didn't think about the questions that we actually should have included. So your engagement surveys, we do a lot of like data collection during onboarding, doing exit. Performance reviews are again a good source of data. In your example of sales, for example, maybe they're all disappointed because they're not being recognized and their goals are not measured correctly, which means that we need to go back and say, like, what's happening with goal setting in this team, or in terms of recognition and reward for this team. So all of this data that we have is our best friend. I know teams have been historically a little bit allergic to data because it's almost like the big bad wolf. But it's honestly, it helps you tell the story. It's not showing the figure. I've been there. I've made that mistake before. And you just go in with the big number and say, like, this is going to convince everyone. And you walk out of that meeting an hour later and feel like, great, I lost the room. It's about the ability to tell the story and what that number means.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, you kind of hit the nail on the head with a lot of people, if that's even a word.
Yeah.
The data analytical side of it, if you're like coming from a traditional HR sense, more and more HR people have to be into analytics and data. It's been asked of us. Now, if you aren't that way minded, or you haven't had an intro into that, how do you start thinking about data? What are some of the steps like L&D or HR pros can take to go, look, I know a weakness is that I am not analytically driven. How can they start to become?
I think sometimes we feel like the mountain is harder to climb than it actually is. Especially these days, like you've got so many of your HRSs, your tools just give you the data already digested for you.
Yeah.
I think it's more understanding why that data matters or that metric matters more so than understanding the mechanics behind how to get to the number. Most HRSs today will tell you your attrition score or all these things that you need to know. And I think we just then need to have the ability to understand what that means, because these metrics also are very much industry specific. So if you look engagement, attrition, there'll be industries that it's higher, others that it's lower, and there's that nuance that we need to take into account. So I would say if you're starting and you feel like data is something that you don't understand, think about it as almost like a map that you're navigating. You won't know until you got to the destination if you're not looking at the metric. Yeah. There's the old saying of like, you can't improve what you don't measure. Yeah. And that is true. So if we here in whatever organization we work at, if we're here to improve our employee experience, if we're here to make sure that we set our people up for success, we need to know we need to be able to break down what does the elements of that success. Yeah. Because we can't just say, oh, it's all down to the manager. And the manager is a good indicator, like the way, like the frequency of feedback the managers are giving, the frequency of one-to-ones they have in goal setting, all these things, they're really, really important. Behind all of these metrics, there is data. Yeah. So I'm not saying you're going to measure everything under the sun, because you could, but probably shouldn't. But if I'm starting, I would start maybe with 2 or 3 metrics that make sense for my business. So listen to the heartbeat of your business. Yeah. I could tell you, like, go and just do engagement. And then there'll be people listening and be like, engagement doesn't matter to my organization. And that's fine. Find what matters for your organization. Speak to your leaders. Yeah. Speak to, and not as part of like, we have a tendency of putting people almost like as a nice to have from a strategic point of view. It's almost like the CEO, the CFO, the COO, they are doing everything. And then the CPO is there to sort of like aid. Yeah. We need to be part of that conversation. Yeah, yeah. And if the direction, of course, for a business is this, we need to know, like, how do our people contribute to this? How does my team, how do my initiatives allow us to achieve that? Not as an afterthought, but as part of the strategy.
Yeah.
So understanding that, then you can understand, okay, so if this is what I'm responsible for, what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to focus on for the next 2 years, whatever it is, and start there.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. And those kind of CPOs or getting a seat at the table is, if you don't know how the company makes business or what metrics really drive that business and they care about, you ask them. And if you don't understand when they tell you, you ask questions about, like,
Exactly.
explain to me. Like, you have to be inquisitive, don't you, to understand it? That's how I've done it. I've just been really nosy and said, how does this work? And, you know, the people team, you talk to everyone across the organisation, especially in a small organisation. So you have such great insights into what drives their business unit, what's important to them, what's important to the CEO, CO, etc. And you can piece together where your gaps are. So, yeah, love that. Last question on this subject, because I've got a couple more I want to talk to you about, but on the people-led thing, is what is the future of the traditional kind of HR? I know we could probably speak about this for hours as well, like how HR has generally acted, like you said, as policy or ER and in their own, this is the HR world. How do you think it's changing and why do you think it needs to change?
I think it's changing as a reflection of the changes the workplace has gone through. There would still be a need for it, I would say, but I don't think that reactive, at least across, there'll be industries that maybe that is still irrelevant, so I don't want to like make a sweeping statement on here, but I think for the majority of organizations out there, you want your people function to be elevated, to be part of the discussions, because there's no way a company achieves their goals without people. Yeah, that's the only way. And when we talk about people, for example, we can talk about skills. And there's a revolution happening in terms of skills because we have AI coming in. We don't know what that's going to look like. We're all going through that journey together. But if we excuse ourselves from that conversation and say, for example, AI is the IT department's responsibility or the security department's responsibility, we've already like shut the door on something that we should be part of. So I think, going back to what I was saying before, I think to adopt that product approach, you need to be inquisitive. When we say like understanding your end user changes. We tend to think of our end user as just the employee. Our end user can also, depending on whatever it is that we're working on, could also be your business. Yeah. Understanding what is it that your business needs, understanding the ins and outs of like, how does your business make money? Yeah. How does, like, what is it, what are your competitors doing? We need to have that sort of like more wider view of things. And from my perspective, I think through the years, some people teams have been sort of like more towards either the people side or towards more the more sort of like policy compliance side. And we've kind of been a little bit reluctant to step into the business side in terms of like saying, hey, I have an opinion on this. Yeah. And my opinion is just as valid as yours. Yeah. So the business will need us to be more involved. Yeah. If you look at how they think AI is going to shape organizations, a lot of the admin work, a lot of these things will be done by AI. A lot of the what humans will have to do is the decision making, right? Like you say, AI is going to tell you X, Y, and Z, and you have to say, does that make sense? Does that not make sense? Are we going to do that? Are we not going to do that? Yeah. So it's more cognitive work rather than actual operational work. Yeah. And that means that we need to understand what is it that we're trying to add value to. Yeah. And that's where the product sort of, and you can call it product, I'm sure other people will call it something else, but it's understanding how we drive value and impact to our businesses, which could be in a myriad of ways. Yeah. But I think it starts there. I think if we hold on to like, no, we're the policy keepers, we're here to ensure that, I don't know, health and safety happens and that harassment policy is up to date, which obviously those things are important, but that's not going to get us to that strategic seat that we've been shouting out about for years. Yeah. No, completely agree with you. And like you said, with the introduction of AI, a lot of those things like policy writing, letters, anything like that can be done so quickly now. So actually, where can your time be spent? And it's at that strategic level that we have been all shouting about for so many years, saying, I want to be, seat at the table. I want to be more strategic. This is our opportunity to learn what the business need for us
to have that seat at the table. So,
and it can be quite daunting to go into that.
Yeah.
Because, like you say, admitting that you want to know more about the business also comes with a degree of vulnerability of saying, I actually don't know a lot of things. And that's difficult.
Yeah.
And it can be, especially if you're part of a team or you're working in companies where maybe you don't have high levels of psychological safety, that can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
I'm not taking anything away from that. I
Yeah.
understand that. But what's the alternative?
Exactly.
It's if we don't try to break down those walls are not going to break themselves down
Yeah.
by themselves. So
Yeah, completely agree with you. I want to talk to you about creating a high performance culture, because you are known for creating these kind of culture first, high performing culture, and they kind of lend into each other, because actually if you think about culture first and how people feel, that does feed into being a high performance. So number one, what does high performance look like? I mean, it's going to be hard to define. Define space, Daniel. But like, how do you define how do you know when it's a high performance culture?
I think, wasn't that the buzzword of last year?
Oh,
Everyone's
buzzword.
talking about.
Still buzzing.
It's still buzzing. For me, a high performance culture is a culture where people have clarity of what they're striving to achieve, clarity of goals, clarity of whether or not they're on the right track. So that feedback piece.
Yeah.
And they also, those goals lead to obviously impact to the business, so the goals are well set and whatnot.
Yeah.
But they're also recognized and appreciated for achieving those.
Yeah.
And there are probably like more ways to define it. I'm trying to be a little bit more simplistic here, but I think it comes down to that. I hear a lot of people saying we want to build a high performance culture, but when you sort of like try to unpeel that, you don't really find much substance behind that. I think for me, you can't speak about high performance without goals.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we need to have a very convoluted performance process. That's not what I'm advocating. But I don't think we can talk about high performance without goals, because goals give you that clarity of whether or not someone has achieved what we believe to be the right thing for the business. So I'm working off the assumption that the goals are well set. But that gives you the clarity of whether or not someone's on the right track and their impact has actually had the impact we expected it was going to have on the business.
Yeah.
For the person to be clear on that, there's a layer of obviously feedback. So the feedback needs to be, and we hear this time and time again, which needs to be ongoing, needs to be done at the right time, and almost like just course correcting people without of waiting 6 months to deliver feedback that the person could have benefited from last week. That now, if you look at it from a more sort of like behavioral research perspective, which obviously I'm very passionate about, they say that you can't have any of this without psychological safety.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we need to have. So, and I truly believe that, because I also need to, if you're my manager, I need to be in a space where if I made a mistake, that I can come to you and say, I've dropped the ball.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to deliver this, or whatever it is. Or I also need to be in a space where I say, like, I actually disagree with you, or I have this idea. So I think that degree of psychological safety is so important. It's hard to nurture. I'm not saying otherwise. If you want to start building high performance culture, start with building that psychological safety in your teams. Go from there to like creating goals that are linked to the organizational goals, but that also people understand how they can go about delivering them. Don't make things so convoluted that people think like, I don't even know what this means. And we hear all the time people saying, oh, it's easy for salespeople to create goals because it's so tangible. But for us in support functions, it's harder. It's like, well, if it's harder, we need to work a little bit harder to make it less unclear. Because a lot of what we do either directly or indirectly contributes to what we're trying to achieve in the business. So if it means we need to be creative, if we need to like ask ChatGPT for a few ideas, you can.
And it gives you it.
But also like then think critically about those and say like, does this make sense? So creating those goals. There was a study done a few years ago that said like the teams or the managers that set goals and that have regular one-to-ones with their team members have teams that are 7% more motivated. And just think about that. It's just two little things that you can do, setting goals, and then just keep checking on those, giving feedback, all these things in your one-to-ones. Your teams are going to be more motivated. So these are the principles that I think you need to rely on to build that high-performance culture. Now, if you work in a business that every 3 months the goalpost changes, that's going to be hard because you're committing to something and 3 months later things change.
Yeah.
So I understand for a lot of startups, and I've been there in a lot of startups, that's the reality of it. So we also need, I keep saying this, being mindful of the context in which we operate and the business needs. But for me, it starts with psychological safety, feedback, goals, and then we need to recognize our people for delivering above and beyond. Which, sorry, I keep going.
Do you know what? It's amazing because my next question was going to be to you: what role do managers play in, setting up a high performance? Because HR, you give the remit of set performance ratings or goals, etc., and they expect that by you dictating that, it's going to be a high performance culture, and then the managers don't give the one-to-ones, they don't do their feedback on time, they save it for their kind of...
They don't have the career conversations, all of those things are important.
So, how do you bring them on board? How do you incentivize them to say your role is the most important role in the success of creating a high-performance culture?
They are like the connecting link between all of this. There was when I was at Culturam, so before I was at Oatly, a lot of my role was like analyzing data and then translating that data to our customers into something a little bit more tangible that could help them improve their, whatever it is, employee experience, performance, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And one thing I used to tell them is there were studies done that showed that that manager effectiveness was the best predictor of organizational success. And what that meant was the way in which our managers set their teams up for success. So giving feedback, setting goals that are appropriate, like all these things, have career conversations, make sure their teams are engaged and motivated. So if a manager is effective in the running of their own team, that puts the company in a much better place to succeed, which makes sense. Because if every manager is doing this across the organization, the culmination of that's going to be obviously the company is going to be in a better place. It's not like quid pro quo. Like, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to happen because there's an external context that we all sort of like are... that we don't control, that we are subject to, but it puts you in a better place to succeed. And I think and I remember saying this to a lot of my clients, and for them, a lot of them, it was the light bulb moment of like, how much, like you can create all these presentation decks, all this really amazing strategy. If the people that are running the teams don't connect with it, don't understand it, don't know how to translate it to your team, or if you don't have the right people managing the teams, because there's still situations where people are pushed into managerial roles where they don't actually enjoy or it's their forte, all those big presentations and those strategy decks fall apart. Yeah. Because like it makes sense at the top, but if the people on the ground don't connect with it, are not aligned with it, are doing something completely different, and we've all seen this across our careers, the whole thing falls apart. Yeah. So it's really important that we work with our leaders and then with our managers. They understand like the key role that they play, and not just in terms of like the performance, like in terms of hiring, in terms of feedback, all these things. The managers play such a crucial role. A lot of our managers are also like very short for time and attention. So we also need to be mindful of that. If they're so key and crucial to the success of our business, maybe we need to redesign the role of the manager to understand how much time should they be actually spending doing work and how much time should they be spending supporting the team and enabling them to do the work and empowering the team to do the work. Yeah. Again, I'm pretty sure it's the industry specific, but it's a good exercise instead of like just adding tasks and responsibilities on top of the big long to-do list that our managers have, is but being more mindful of and understanding that the less or if we make them really, really scarce for time and they don't have the attention and the capacity to focus on what their teams need, the likelihood is that the team's not going to be successful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because you find that managers are under such pressure because a lot of managers have their own role, their ICs themselves, they have targets themselves, but they also have to manage a team and think about everything that comes from managing a team. So it's
and they still have like lives outside of the office. They have like young families, or they have whatever it is that they're going through. Yeah. And something's got to give.
Yeah, something's got to give. So you've got to give them time to, if they want a high performing team, they've got to give that manager space to make sure that they have, the one-to-ones and the coaching or mentoring. They have the time to do that, to make them a high-performance team. It's not going to happen just because you're saying we want it, because it just adds more pressure. So, yeah, I completely agree. Have you found that AI has helped, not so much in the one-to-ones, but, in that coaching, so bit of role playing. Have you seen that work well?
I haven't used it personally, but I've heard of stories of people that I found it very useful.
Yeah.
I think, again, it's being mindful of what AI tool you're using and what that means. Because, again, we need to also, we were saying before, like, what is the tool telling? Is it telling me what I want to hear, or is it actually challenging me?
Yes.
I've seen like AI coaches that actually do a good job.
Yeah.
Give you suggestions, help you, for example, prepare for a tough conversation.
Yeah.
No one enjoys having a tough conversation.
Oh, yeah.
We all have to do it at some point, especially like if you're a manager. It helps you maybe role play some of those things. I think that could be quite beneficial. So I think I've never used it personally, but I've heard some people that they've vouched for it. And I've also heard of people that have taken it one step further, and especially in tech companies where they've, instead of being a written coach, they've sort of like built a coach that you can speak to.
Yeah.
So it's almost like when you're role playing it, instead of typing a conversation, you're actually having a conversation with an AI coach on the other side.
Yeah.
And some people have found that really, really helpful. I can't speak from my experience, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah. I know some of our customers have used gurus, like manager gurus. And I think it's just about practice. If you practice something, you're going to get better at it. So
100%.
in that safe environment, just trying to have those kind of difficult conversations, because they are awkward. They can be awkward, can't they? And managers, I mean, I've had many come to me over my years in HR saying, how do I say X, Y, and Z? And I'm just like, well, this is how you can't nicify it. Some things you just have to give that message, but do it courteous. These are people at the end of the day, and the way someone exits the business should also be as good as they enter the business. That's my belief anyway. So you need to treat people with dignity, and it's just like you said, it's training managers on how to have the good conversations, but also how to give constructive conversations around the data, not so personal, like this is,
And it's obviously, I think it's a skill, and it's a muscle that we all sort of flex throughout our career. It's not easy, and I don't think anyone will be like, oh, I've mastered this skill, I never get nervous before a very tough conversation. I don't think anyone enjoys those.
No.
But having that coach, if we think about, for example, how people learn best, and if we think of the 7-20-10s and all these things, like this would fall into that area where you're kind of like being exposed to it. You haven't had the conversation yet, so it's not really the 70%, but it's still like you're being exposed to it. You're trying to practice it a little bit more, and that gives you skills, and rather than just like, I don't know, reading a book on how to give feedback, for example. So I think it could be definitely something companies and managers should explore.
Yeah, definitely love that. Last question for you, because I know we're running out of time, and I would 100% have you back for another 3 podcasts to cover everything else.
I don't know if the people at home would agree, but fine.
The title of our podcast is L&D Disrupt.
Okay.
So my question to you is, what do you think's going to come into HR or L&D that is going to disrupt in the next 12 months? Like, we've got AI. Do you think that's going to be even more disruptive, or do you think there's something else?
God, that's a big question.
Putting him on the spot here.
You are. Obviously, I think with AI is more because there's a lot of unknowns, and we know it's going to change how roles. For example, for a lot of organizations, they've built competency frameworks. Those competencies are probably all void now.
Yeah, outdated.
They need to be, because some of those skills maybe are not applicable anymore. So there's going to be a lot of change, I think. Maybe change is going to be like the next buzzword. I think AI definitely will impact the people team, but it's also not just people. It's impacting every department in an organization. I'm trying to think more something. I want to say something slightly different than AI. I think people teams need to really understand the business metrics and business ops and how the business works. And it doesn't seem like a big challenge, but it is. It means us spending time with every area of the business, from, I don't know, logistics to supply to whatever it is, but kind of like understanding our business, because the transformations we're going through is going to be maybe the biggest we've gone through in our lifetime. And we need to be prepared for it. And we can't make people decisions without understanding how each and every one of our teams contributes to the overall mission of what the company is trying to achieve. We have a tendency of putting the focus on maybe the main one. If you're in tech, it might be your engineering team or it might be your sales team, whatever it is. But those teams don't exist alone. We need to have a whole holistic view of it. So obviously AI is going to be the big one. I think the second one is really understanding that internal business context and marrying that with the very tumultuous external context in which we operate at the moment. So being able to navigate that and being able to go to your CEO, go to a CFO, whoever it is, or your founder, whatever it is, in being able to be that well-informed person that not only understands the business, but also understands the external context in which the business operates. I think that's going to be pretty challenging.
Yeah, I agree with you. Perfect top tip as well, because I agree with you. Most people would kind of go AI, but I know your big picture, and I completely agree with you. And you will find that if you do it well, I do think HR are in a great position to be like co-CEOs or CEOs, COOs, because actually you work across the organisation. And if you understand the mechanisms of it, why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you be running like a business?
And I think with AI, what we're talking about, I think, because we say AI is almost like a slogan or like a buzzword. But if we look at it, I think we're talking really about change.
Yeah.
We all know how people feel about change, but it's the change of how we work and the change of how roles exist and grow and progress within the organization. So it's that change adoption, that change management, and also operating. It's not just the internal change that's happening, because if we look outside of organization, like there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of like things every day in the news that impact the economy, that impact this, that, and the other. And so we also going to be able to. We need to understand not just our internal change and the internal context that we are dealing with, but also how that applies to the external one. So just really being able to do those. So I think, it's. I had a manager once that said one of the best skills to develop going forward is to unlearn things. So the ability for you to forget how things were done and just learning new things. And I think she's spot on. Yeah. And I think we're going to need more of that. Unlearn. Oh, but we used to do it this way. We don't do it anymore. We need to that ability, which is not easy, but the ability to unlearn things and learning new things. I think that's going to be a big skill for us to develop. Yeah,
100%. Oh, Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure. The time has gone so fast. Thank you so much
for
coming on the podcast. If you want to link in with Daniel, we are both on LinkedIn. Please link in with us. Please listen to our podcast. We've got a lot more guests coming up. But thank you again, Daniel.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by HowNow, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use HowNow to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, SoEnergy, 47, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.